Hello. I printed two out because I sweated through one of them. That's a real thing. Yeah. Too tall. Metal bear. All right. There we go. In eighth grade, thank you. In eighth grade, I was the only girl in my class of 5 students. Yes, it was rough. I went to one of those small private schools for kids whose parents were in Mensa and probably could have gotten ego murdered in a traditional public school setting. Turns out you still go through the rough patches of maturity even if your school teacher has a treehouse and spends a semester substituting Esperanto for English. Kids still insulted each other. We just had better vocabularies while doing it. Like any middle school, most of the conflict centered around who was friends with who and who was dating or flirting, because it was a very, very tiny population with children who genetically were already socially awkward. This meant that no relationship lasted more than a couple of months, and you were lucky if you tried more than holding hands without ever having a panic attack. So as a sophomore in high school, when given the chance to make out with a cute boy who I didn't know at all at Ska Fest, I thought perhaps finally I knew what heaven was like, despite logically concluding that it did not exist. I will admit I was not at Ska Fest because I love the music, which sounded a bit like polka and punk had a kind of baby. I was at Ska Fest because finally I was cool. Or cool enough to be invited to go to Ska Fest. My middle school experience did not prepare me for high school socializing, even if that high school was full of visual and performing art weirdos. My freshman year was mostly lonely, except for a few girls who put up with my know-it-all-itude, Weird Al recitations in cargo pants fashion. This is why sophomore year I decided things were going to be different. So I made a list of all the movies that people had mentioned in conversation so that I could get references that were not Monty Python or Mel Brooks. I had friends make lists of musics that I should listen to that was not from a musical. And most importantly, I started listening to my friend Anne, who was incredibly pretty and uniquely fashionable, about what to wear and how to talk to boys. Ska Fest was packed, and I was beautiful thanks to an Anne makeover that took all of the time between after school and being dropped off at the venue. We got upstairs and quickly moved outside to the balcony. I found out that Ska Fest was about the music and dancing for some, and chain smoking and cigarettes without parental supervision for all others. Anne seemed to know lots of people to introduce me to, and somehow I ended up talking to this taller white boy with a huge head of brown hair, fro-size hair. He was really cute, though, and constantly smiling. Later, I'd find out this was because a lot of the pots and the consumption of it. He invited me back inside to listen to the music, and listen I did, sorta. It wasn't too long between us being inside half-heartedly bobbing our heads to the beat, to us leaning back against the wall, making out, like a lot, for like an hour. Dear God, this was awesome, because unlike anyone else's mouth I had stumbled into before this, it wasn't actually a disaster. I was elated, and also I was a little sure I was dreaming. Up until that point, I had never really been able to let go, and I had thought it was because I wasn't make-out material. I'd always struggled internally about whether or not it was okay to make out with someone whose AIM screen name I didn't even know. I began to worry that we were a little too publicly displaying our affection, and I realized I hadn't seen Anne in a while, and though I should check in with her, so whatever, I reluctantly winded down after one last kiss. So he took my hand and kept holding it until we found her. Ladies and gentlemen, I thought I had found the one. But no. He was a teenage boy, and it was the week before Valentine's Day, which even now seems to be more of a stress on a relationship than an ignition for new love. He gave me his screen name, and I attempted to chat with him a few days after Makeout Ska Fest 2004. He was really odd, though, and I found myself thinking that maybe he was trying to be weird so that I would stop talking to him. Anne invited him to her Valentine's Day party as my date, but he flaked. The whole Valentine's Day thing seems to be the thing that made him so antsy, and friends of friends told me he probably got too high and forgot, so I decided to drop that jerk and went back to having unrequited crushes, which may not have been as magical, but definitely seemed more attainable after feeling confident in my physical prowess. End of story, end of a somewhat heartwarming story of an awkward geek coming into her nascent sexuality. Ha ha! No. 11 years later. I saw a guy standing in front of the bar I work at and quickly identified him as our new security guy. He was friendly enough and already knew my name, which I thought was strange, and I tried to figure it out if I remembered him from somewhere. It dawned on me while I was making a drink, and impulsively I told some friends who were sitting at the bar that I thought I had made out with the new door guy when I was 15. I felt slightly embarrassed, but resolved not to bring it up with him and hopefully pretend like it never happened. Unfortunately, one of my friends took the opportunity to take a cigarette break and go outside and just straight up ask him if he remembered me, which he did. Crap. I'm not exactly sure why I was so embarrassed. It may have been because I was actually in the middle of an incredibly awful hypomaniac episode brought on by grief and lack of medication. It may have been because work has always been a place where I could bury my head and not have to worry about the drama I'd felt in school. Whatever the underlying case, I refused to look or to speak to him for 6 weeks, opting, as opposed to use the back entrance to enter and exit the building of my work. If this sounds a little much and sort of crazy, it's because I was definitely certifiably sort of crazy at this point. I figured he would be traded out for some new security person eventually. It's a fairly high turnover position. But man, he didn't miss a single week. He was even early. My mental state continued to decline, and I was descending into a fairly deep depression and barely able to make the social interactions needed to do my job. It was this inability to be a normal person that led me to get over my adolescent shame, because honestly, there is a point you reach where you can't really feel anything anyways. And this depth of depression, however, is where I found the most humor. Humor was perhaps the only thing that kept me out of checking into a hospital. And humor is what this guy was made of. Turns out my old makeout buddy knew exactly what to say to make me laugh and wasn't afraid of my scary existential mess. He laughed at my jokes about the world burning and the meaningless of life, and I found extremely ironic that I had been avoiding a person who actually made me feel a little less lonely with my pain. And I contemplated whether or not he might be up for making out again, but also realized that I was in no state to consider dating, and fortunately he didn't seem like the dating type. Okay, I have to confess something now, that this is the story of how I met my current boyfriend. We've been dating for almost 2 years now, which is officially the longest continuous relationship I have ever been in, and I have tried to break up with him numerous times. I have a lot of attachment and mental health issues, but he has patiently waded through them with me. He's also pretty freaking weird, and we've had to negotiate how to have a video game life balance. But who knows where our journey will end or will go. It's been wild and wonderful so far. And yes, the making out is as good as it was the first time.